The neon lights of Nexus Station flickered against the darkness of space, casting purple and blue shadows across the crowded marketplace. Captain Marcus Chen stepped off his cargo hauler, the Time's defiant dawn asterisk, and immediately felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes watching him. Humans were still rare in this part of the galaxy, and their reputation preceded them like whispered legends. The station buzzed with activity as dozens of species conducted their business. Tall, graceful Etherians floated past on anti-gravity platforms, their crystalline bodies refracting the artificial light into rainbow patterns. Stocky Bruthan traders argued loudly over shipping rates, their rocky skins scraping against metal railings. In the shadows, hooded figures from species Marcus couldn't identify moved with purpose through the crowds. Marcus had come to Nexus Station for one reason: to deliver medical supplies to the Outer Rim colonies. His cargo hold contained vaccines and surgical equipment desperately needed by human settlements struggling to survive on hostile worlds. But as he made his way through the station's central hub, something caught his attention that made his blood run cold. In the center of the marketplace stood a raised platform surrounded by a gathering crowd. On that platform, behind shimmering energy bars, stood a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and emerald eyes that held a mixture of defiance and fear. Her clothes were simple but clean, suggesting she hadn't been a prisoner for long. A massive Vorthan auctioneer, his blue-scaled skin gleaming under the lights, called out bids in the universal trade language. His voice boomed across the marketplace as various aliens shouted offers. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his translator earpiece working overtime to process the rapid-fire negotiations. The female human shows excellent potential for entertainment purposes, the auctioneer announced, his serpentine tongue flicking out between words. Notice the fire in her eyes, the strength in her stance. She would make an excellent addition to any pleasure establishment or private collection. Marcus felt his jaw clench as he watched the woman on the platform. She stood, with her chin raised, refusing to show weakness even as aliens examined her like livestock. When a particularly grotesque creature with multiple arms reached toward the energy barrier, she didn't flinch. Instead, she stared directly at the being until it backed away. The bidding had reached astronomical numbers. A wealthy Celestian merchant, his golden skin adorned with precious gems, seemed determined to claim her. His competition came from a syndicate representative whose species Marcus didn't recognize, but whose reputation for running illegal entertainment venues was well known throughout the sector. Marcus checked his credit balance and felt his heart sink. Even if he liquidated everything he owned, including his ship, he couldn't match the bids being thrown around. The woman's fate seemed sealed when the Celestian merchant raised his offer to 50 million credits. 50 million credits to the honored Celestian trader, the auctioneer called out. Going once. That's when Marcus noticed something others had missed. The woman's eyes weren't just defiant. They were intelligent, calculating. She was studying the crowd, memorizing faces, planning something. He recognized the look because he'd worn it himself during his military days when escape seemed impossible, but surrender wasn't an option. The auctioneer continued his countdown. Going twice. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward from the crowd and called out in a voice that carried across the entire marketplace. I challenge the legality of this auction under Galactic Trade Regulation 347B. The marketplace fell silent. Even the constant hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause. The auctioneer's head swiveled toward Marcus, his reptilian eyes narrowing with annoyance. Human? You dare interrupt a lawful auction? You dare? Interrupt? Interrupt? A lawful auction. Marcus pulled out his trader's license and held it high. According to Galactic Trade Regulation 347B, no sentient being can be sold without their explicit, uncoerced consent. I demand to hear this woman's consent stated clearly for the record. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several species shifted uncomfortably, knowing that while slavery was common practice in many sectors, it technically violated the broader galactic trade agreements that allowed stations like Nexus to operate in neutral space. The Celestian merchant stepped forward, his gem-encrusted robes catching the light. The human speaks of regulations that are rarely enforced in this sector. The female was acquired legally through salvage rights. Salvage rights apply to property, not people, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the dozens of weapons now pointed in his direction. If she's truly property, then she has no consciousness and no value as entertainment. If she's conscious enough to provide entertainment, then she's a sentient being with rights. The woman on the platform looked directly at Marcus for the first time. He could see the surprise in her eyes. Followed by something that might have been hope, she opened her mouth to speak. But the auctioneer activated a neural suppression field that prevented her from making sound. The merchandise will not speak until purchased, the Vorthan declared. Marcus felt anger surge through him, the same fury that had driven him to leave his military career after witnessing too many injustices he couldn't prevent. But this time was different. This time, he could do something. Then you've just proven my point, Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the marketplace. You're suppressing her ability to give consent, which means this auction is illegal under the very treaties that give this station the right to exist. Security forces began moving through the crowd, their weapons powering up. Marcus knew he had perhaps minutes before they decided to end this disruption permanently. He also knew that challenging the auction publicly meant he'd made enemies of some very powerful and dangerous beings. The woman on the platform began making gestures with her hands, subtle movements that Marcus realized were sign language. She was spelling out words, THANKYOU. The auctioneer noticed the hand movements and activated additional restraints, locking her arms to her sides. The auction will proceed as scheduled. Security. Remove the disruptive human. Rating 1. Rating 1. As armed guards closed in, Marcus locked eyes with the woman one last time. He saw her mouth a single word. Run. Instead, Marcus stood his ground. I invoke the right of champion under Article 156 of the Nexus Station Charter. I challenge the legal basis of this auction and demand trial by combat to determine the woman's status. The marketplace erupted into chaos. The right of champion was an ancient law, rarely invoked, but still technically valid. It meant that any dispute over individual rights could be settled through single combat, with the winner determining the fate of the disputed party. The station administrator, an elderly Zentauran whose blue skin was marked with the tattoos of high office, materialized via hologram above the crowd. His voice cut through the noise, like a blade. Human captain, do you understand what you're invoking? The right of champion means trial by combat to the death. If you lose, not only will the woman be sold, but your ship and cargo will be forfeit to compensate for the disruption you've caused. Marcus looked up at the hologram, then back at the woman on the platform. Her green eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and amazement. No stranger had ever risked their life for her before. I understand the terms completely, Marcus replied. And I choose my opponent. The administrator nodded slowly. Very well. Whom do you choose to face in combat? Marcus looked around the marketplace at the various beings who had been bidding on the woman. He could choose the Celestian merchant, who despite his wealth was physically weak. He could select one of the other bidders who might be more manageable in single combat. Instead, Marcus pointed directly at the massive Vorthan auctioneer. I choose him. The crowd gasped. Vorthans were known throughout the galaxy as apex predators, standing over 8 feet tall, with natural armor plating and strength that could crush steel. They were professional warriors before they became merchants, and many still maintained their combat training. The auctioneer's serpentine smile revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. Foolish human, I accept your challenge. When I tear you apart, the female will fetch an even higher price as the cause of such magnificent entertainment. As the crowd formed a combat circle and weapons were brought for the duel, Marcus caught the woman's eye one more time. She was no longer afraid. Instead, she was studying him with the same intensity she'd shown while planning her escape. He realized she was trying to understand why a complete stranger would risk everything for her freedom. The truth was, Marcus wasn't entirely sure himself. Maybe it was his military background, where no soldier was left behind. Maybe it was the memory of his sister, who had died in circumstances he couldn't control. Or maybe it was simply because it was the right thing to do. The Vorthan auctioneer selected a massive war club embedded with energy spikes. Marcus chose a simple plasma sword, its blue energy blade humming to life. The crowd pressed closer, eager to witness what many believed would be a very short and bloody fight. As they faced each other in the improvised arena, Marcus heard the woman's voice in his mind, transmitted through a short-range telepathic implant he hadn't noticed before. "My name is Elena Rodriguez. If you die for me, I want you to know that someone will remember your sacrifice." The station administrator raised his hand to signal the start of combat. Marcus gripped his weapon tighter and prepared to fight for Elena's freedom, knowing that failure meant death for him and a fate worse than death for her. The hand fell, and the battle for humanity's honor began. The Vorthan auctioneer moved with surprising speed for his massive size, his war club whistling through the air where Marcus had been standing a split second before. The energy spikes along the weapon's surface crackled with enough power to punch through starship hull plating. Marcus rolled to the side, his military training kicking in as muscle memory took over. He'd fought Vorthans before during the border wars, and he knew their primary advantage was raw strength combined with their natural armor plating. But they also had weaknesses. Limited flexibility in their spine and joints that could be exploited by a smaller, faster opponent. The crowd roared as Marcus brought his plasma sword up in a defensive arc, the blue energy blade meeting the descending war club with a shower of sparks. The impact sent vibrations up his arms that made his teeth ache, but he managed to deflect the blow and create some distance. "You move well for prey, human," the Vorthan hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air. "But you cannot run forever in this small space." Marcus didn't waste breath on a reply. He was already calculating angles and distances, looking for any advantage he could find. The improvised arena was roughly 30 feet in diameter, surrounded by jeering aliens who had quickly placed bets on the outcome. Most of the odds heavily favored the Vorthan. Elena watched from her energy cage, her hands pressed against the barrier. Marcus could see her lips moving, and he realized she was counting his steps, timing his movements. Even as a prisoner facing an uncertain fate, she was trying to help him find patterns he could use. The Vorthan charged again, this time feinting left, before swinging his massive weapon in a horizontal arc that would have cut Marcus in half. But Marcus had seen Elena's subtle head movement indicating the direction of the feint, and he dropped into a sliding tackle that took him under the swing. His plasma sword found the gap between armor plates at the Vorthan's knee, and alien blood hissed as it hit the energy blade. The wound wasn't deep enough to cripple, but it was first blood, and the crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. "Impossible," the Celestian merchant muttered to his bodyguards. "Humans aren't supposed to be capable of this level of combat." But Marcus was just getting started. Years of fighting in humanity's expansion wars had taught him that superior technology and physical advantages meant nothing if you couldn't adapt to unexpected tactics. And humans, as the galaxy was slowly learning, were very good at being unexpected. The wounded Vorthan became more cautious, circling Marcus while looking for an opening. His reptilian eyes tracked every movement. But Marcus could see the calculation behind them, changing. The auctioneer was beginning to realize this wouldn't be the easy execution he'd expected. Marcus used the breathing room to study his opponent more carefully. The Vorthan's armor plating was thickest across his chest and back, but there were vulnerable spots at the joints, neck, and underarms. More importantly, the alien was favoring his wounded leg slightly, which would affect his balance. "You fight with skill, human," the Vorthan admitted, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "But skill will not save you when I crush your bones to powder." This time, Marcus made the first move. He feinted toward the wounded leg, then spun away as the war club came down, using the Vorthan's own momentum to guide the weapon into the arena floor. The energy spikes embedded themselves in the metal decking, and for a crucial second, the auctioneer was off balance. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. His plasma sword traced a burning line across the Vorthan's exposed side, cutting through armor and flesh alike. The alien roared in pain and fury, yanking his weapon free and swinging wildly. But now Marcus was inside his guard, too close for the massive war club to be effective. He pressed his advantage, his sword work becoming a deadly dance that kept him just ahead of grasping claws and desperate strikes. The crowd had grown silent, watching in disbelief as a human not only held his own against a Vorthan warrior, but seemed to be winning. Several aliens began revising their bets, while others started making calls to associates who would want to know about this unprecedented display. Elena's telepathic voice reached Marcus again. "Behind you. Left shoulder." 3 seconds. Marcus trusted her completely. Without looking, he spun left and brought his sword up in a backhand slash. The plasma blade caught the Vorthan's descending claw just as it would have raked across his spine, severing 2 of the alien's fingers. The Vorthan staggered backward, his war club forgotten, as he stared at his maimed hand. Green blood dripped onto the arena floor, and for the first time, uncertainty entered his reptilian eyes. "How?" he gasped. "How do you see attacks you cannot see?" Marcus glanced toward Elena, who gave him the slightest nod. She was using her telepathic abilities to track the Vorthan's intentions and relay them to him. It was brilliant tactical coordination between strangers who had never fought together before. But the effort was taking its toll on her. Marcus could see strain lines around her eyes, and her breathing had become labored. The neural suppression field was fighting against her telepathic transmissions, creating a painful feedback loop. He needed to end this quickly. The Vorthan, realizing he was losing, decided to abandon all pretense of honorable combat. He reached into his belt and produced a concealed plasma pistol, bringing it up to aim at Marcus's chest. The crowd erupted in protests. Using ranged weapons violated the traditional rules of trial by combat. But the station administrator made no move to intervene. Marcus realized that the fix had been in from the beginning. They had never intended to honor the outcome if he somehow managed to win. But they had underestimated human adaptability one more time. As the Vorthan's finger tightened on the trigger, Marcus did something that stunned every being in the marketplace. Instead of diving for cover or trying to deflect the shot, he threw his plasma sword like a spear. The spinning blade caught the Vorthan in the throat, just below his armored collar. The alien's shot went wide, scorching the arena floor as he toppled backward. His massive body hit the deck with a sound like falling machinery, and then he was still. Marcus stood alone in the center of the arena, breathing hard but victorious. The crowd was completely silent, unsure how to react to what they had just witnessed. A human had not only defeated a Vorthan warrior in single combat, but had done so while the alien was cheating. The station administrator's hologram flickered as he consulted with unseen advisors. Finally, his voice rang out across the marketplace. "The human captain has won trial by combat. According to the ancient laws, the disputed property is now his by right. We have to the property. The by property. The property is now his by right. We have reser. We have disputed property. Aways one trial. We have disputed property. We have disputed property." Marcus walked over to Elena's energy cage and found the control panel. As the barriers dissolved, she stepped out on unsteady legs. The neural suppression field had left her disoriented, but her eyes were clear and grateful. "Thank you," she said simply. "I owe you my life." Marcus shook his head. "No one owns anyone else. You don't owe me anything. No one. No one. No one. No one." But even as he spoke, Marcus knew their troubles were far from over. The Celestian merchant was conferring angrily with his bodyguards, while other disappointed bidders were making obvious preparations to reclaim what they saw as stolen property. Station security forces were positioning themselves strategically around the marketplace, and Marcus counted at least a dozen weapons trained on his position. Elena noticed the same things he did. They're not going to let us leave, are they? Probably not, Marcus admitted. But we knew this wasn't going to be easy. The station administrator's voice cut through the growing tension. While the trial by combat has been concluded legally, the human captain and his property are advised that Nexus Station cannot guarantee their safety if they remain in this sector. Other interested parties may seek to renegotiate the arrangement through less formal means. It was a polite way of saying they were about to be attacked by every criminal organization and slave trader in the area. Marcus looked around the marketplace and realized they were surrounded by hostiles with nowhere to run. That's when Elena surprised him. "Captain Chen," she said formally, "I formally request passage aboard your vessel and sanctuary under human protection protocols." Marcus blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name? And how do you know about protection protocols?" Elena's expression became grim. "Because I'm not just some random human who got captured by slavers. I'm Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Defense Force. And I've been undercover for 6 months, investigating the slave trade networks operating in this sector." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena wasn't a victim who needed rescuing. She was a military intelligence officer whose cover had just been blown by his heroic gesture. "You were supposed to be sold," he said, understanding dawning. "You were going to infiltrate their networks from the inside." Elena nodded. The plan was to gather intelligence on the major players and their operations. But now that cover is blown, we need to get that information back to human space before they silence both of us permanently. Marcus looked around the marketplace with new eyes. Every alien face now seemed more threatening. Every shadow potentially hiding an assassin. They had gone from rescuing a helpless victim to protecting a vital intelligence asset while surrounded by enemies. "How much data did you collect?" he asked. Elena tapped her temple. "Everything is stored in encrypted neural implants, shipping routes, financial networks, corruption in station administrations, the whole structure. But the data is only valuable if it reaches human command." As if summoned by their conversation, the Celestian merchant approached with a full squad of armed mercenaries. His gem-encrusted face was twisted with rage, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Human captain, I am prepared to offer you 100 million credits for the female. This is far more than she could possibly be worth to you." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Elena. "She's not for sale at any price." "To Marcus. Then you have chosen to die for your principles," the Celestian replied. How refreshingly naive. The mercenaries raised their weapons, and Marcus realized they had perhaps seconds before the shooting started. But Elena grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear, "The cargo bay where they're holding the other prisoners. If we can reach it, I know how to cause a distraction that will let us escape to your ship." Marcus looked toward the distant section of the station where his ship was docked. It seemed impossibly far away with so many enemies between them and safety. "What kind of distraction?" he asked. Elena's smile was fierce and determined. "The kind that brings down half the station and makes sure these slavers never operate again." As the mercenaries closed in and other hostile forces moved to cut off their escape routes, Marcus realized that rescuing Elena had been the easy part. Now they had to survive long enough to escape with intelligence that could cripple the slave trade throughout the sector. The real battle was about to begin. The first shots rang out as Marcus and Elena dove behind an overturned merchant stall. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air where they had been standing, leaving smoking craters in the station's metal walls. The marketplace erupted into chaos as civilians scattered and various factions opened fire on each other. "This way," Elena shouted over the weapons fire, grabbing Marcus's hand and pulling him toward a maintenance corridor he hadn't noticed before. "I've been mapping this station for months." They sprinted through the narrow passage as explosions echoed behind them. Marcus could hear heavy footsteps pursuing them, along with the distinctive whir of Vorthan energy weapons charging up. The mercenaries weren't giving up easily. Elena led them through a maze of service tunnels, her knowledge of the station's layout proving invaluable. They emerged near the detention section, where rows of energy cages held dozens of beings from various species. The sight made Marcus's stomach turn. Families separated, children crying for their parents, and the hollow-eyed stare of people who had given up hope. The station administrator wasn't lying about this being a major hub, Elena said grimly. They process over 1,000 individuals per month through here. The intelligence I've gathered will expose the entire network. They moved quickly between the cages, Elena entering override codes she had memorized during her undercover work. As the energy barriers dissolved, confused prisoners began stepping out of their cells. Listen carefully, Marcus called out in the universal trade language. We're shutting down this operation, but we need you to create a distraction. Head for the emergency escape pods and get as far from the station as possible. A tall, ethereal being with silver skin stepped forward. Human, we have been prisoners for months. Why should we trust you? Elena answered by showing them her hidden military tattoo, a symbol recognized by many species as representing Earth's colonial defense force. Because we're the ones who came back for you. The prisoners needed no further convincing. They began moving toward the escape pod bays, but not before several of them grabbed weapons from the scattered guard posts. Years of captivity had given them plenty of reasons to want revenge against their captors. Now for the real fireworks, Elena said, leading Marcus to a heavily secured door marked with radiation warnings. The station's primary power core. If we overload it just right, we can create a massive electromagnetic pulse that will disable their ships and communication systems without killing everyone aboard. Marcus looked at the complex control panel behind the security door. Do you know how to do that? I spent 3 years as a starship engineer before switching to intelligence, Elena replied, her fingers already dancing across the controls. Trust me. But before she could complete the sequence, the detention bay doors exploded inward. The Celestian merchant strode through the smoke and debris, flanked by a squad of heavily armed enforcers and what looked like a military-grade combat droid. Enough games, humans, the alien merchant roared. You have cost me millions of credits and humiliated me before my peers. I will take the female's head as compensation for my losses. Marcus positioned himself between Elena and the attacking force, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. The combat droid alone could probably take them both down within seconds. That's when the liberated prisoners arrived. A massive Bruthan warrior, his rocky hide scarred from years of forced labor, charged the combat droid with a salvaged plasma cannon. Behind him came dozens of other freed slaves, armed with everything from energy weapons to improvised clubs. Their coordinated assault caught the mercenaries completely off guard. The universal truth about slavery, Elena shouted to the Celestian merchant as battle raged around them, is that it always creates more enemies than profits. She slammed her palm down on the power core override, initiating a controlled cascade failure that would build to a massive energy discharge in approximately 10 minutes. Warning klaxons began blaring throughout the station as automated systems detected the impending overload. The Celestian merchant's eyes went wide as he realized what she had done. You mad human, you'll destroy us all, only if you're still here when it goes off, Marcus replied, grabbing Elena's hand as they ran toward the docking bay where his ship waited. I'd suggest you start evacuating. Trooper 4. They raced through corridors filled with fleeing aliens and emergency lighting. Behind them, the battle between freed prisoners and station security forces was spreading throughout the detention section. The former slaves were fighting with the desperate fury of beings who had nothing left to lose. Marcus's ship, the Times Defiant, Dawn Asterisk, came into view just as the station administrator's voice echoed over the communication system. All personnel evacuate immediately. Station power core failure imminent. Repeat, all personnel evacuate immediately. But they weren't home free yet. A squad of Vorthan security officers blocked their path to the docking tube, their weapons trained on the escaping humans. Behind them, Marcus could see his ship's boarding ramp was down and ready. You will not leave this station alive, humans, the lead Vorthan hissed. Your interference has cost too many important people too much money. Elena stepped forward, her hands raised as if in surrender. Before you shoot, don't you want to know who I really am? The Vorthen's reptilian eyes narrowed. You are valuable merchandise that belongs to my employers. I'm Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Defense Force. And in about 6 minutes, every major military installation in human space is going to receive detailed intelligence about your slave trading operations. She held up a small device that Marcus recognized as a long-range quantum transmitter. I've been uploading encrypted data packets for the last 5 minutes. Your network is already compromised. The Vorthan's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. Attacking a human civilian was one thing, but killing a military officer would bring the full weight of Earth's colonial fleet down on everyone involved. You're bluffing, he said, but his weapon wavered slightly. Elena smiled coldly. The transmission includes the names and locations of every corrupt official on this station, every ship captain involved in the slave routes, and the financial records showing which planetary governments are taking bribes to look the other way. As if to emphasize her point, her transmitter chimed with an acknowledgement signal. The data had been received and verified by Human Military Command. The lead Vorthan made a fatal mistake. Instead of accepting the situation and withdrawing, he decided to silence Elena before she could transmit any additional information. He raised his weapon to fire. Marcus moved faster than thought, his military training taking over completely. He tackled Elena to the ground as plasma bolts sizzled over their heads, then rolled behind a cargo container, but they were still pinned down with no clear path to the ship. That's when the cavalry arrived in an unexpected form. Captain Zara Okafor of the human merchant vessel Times, Prosperity Times, emerged from Marcus's ship with a military-grade pulse rifle. Behind her came 3 more human traders, all armed and moving with the coordinated precision of combat veterans. Marcus, you magnificent fool, Zara called out as she laid down covering fire. Did you really think you could start a revolution without backup? The Vorthan security team found themselves caught in a crossfire between the humans by the ship and the escaped prisoners, still fighting their way through the station. Outflanked and outnumbered, they began falling back toward more defensible positions. How did you know we needed help? Marcus shouted, as he and Elena ran for the boarding ramp. Every human trader in the sector has been monitoring your situation, Zara replied. Word spread fast that one of our own was making a stand against the slavers. We couldn't let you do it alone. They reached the ship just as the 5-minute warning sounded. The station was beginning to shake as the power core cascade failure built toward critical levels. In the distance, Marcus could see escape pods launching as aliens abandoned the station in droves. Elena collapsed into a chair in the ship's medical bay, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The data upload was successful, she reported. Human Command has everything they need to shut down the slave routes and arrest the corrupt officials supporting them. Marcus took the pilot's seat and began emergency departure procedures. What about the other prisoners? 1. Most of them made it to escape pods, Zara reported from the sensor station. The few who stayed behind are helping the remaining captives evacuate. They'll be fine. The Badal. As the Times' defiant dawn times cleared the station's docking bay, Marcus looked back at Nexus Station one last time. The massive structure was already showing signs of the approaching power surge, with lights flickering and sections beginning to shut down. 30 seconds to pulse, Elena announced. The electromagnetic burst, when it came, was visible even through the ship's filtered windows. A sphere of crackling energy expanded from the station, washing over every vessel in the area. Most of the slaver ships found their systems disabled, leaving them dead in space until rescue vessels could reach them. But the human ships, warned in advance, had powered down their vulnerable systems and rode out the pulse with minimal damage. They were free to escape while their enemies drifted helpless. It's over, Elena said quietly. The network is broken. It'll take them years to rebuild what they lost today. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained troubled. This was just one station. How many more are out there? Elena looked out at the stars ahead of them, her green eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. That's why we do this work, Captain. One station at a time, one rescue at a time, until no sentient being has to live in chains. As they jumped to hyperspace, carrying Elena's intelligence back to human space, Marcus realized something important had changed. The galaxy's criminals had always dismissed humans as soft, naive newcomers who didn't understand how things really worked. Today, they had learned that humans understood perfectly well. They just refused to accept it. The message would spread through criminal networks across the galaxy. Humans don't negotiate with slavers. They don't look the other way when innocents suffer. And they never, ever abandon their own. And for those who profited from misery and exploitation, that made humanity the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 3 months later, Marcus received a transmission from Elena, now back with Colonial Defense Force intelligence. The data she had collected led to the arrest of over 300 individuals involved in the slave trade and the liberation of more than 10,000 prisoners. But more importantly, her report had sparked something larger. Human trading captains throughout the sector were forming informal networks to watch for slave operations and coordinate rescue efforts. What had started as one man's refusal to walk away from injustice was becoming a movement. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their stubborn insistence that everyone, regardless of species or origin, had the right to live free. And they were willing to fight for that principle, one person at a time.